is not Nokuthula's past which makes who I am. It is part of who I am. Me coming into the dam, closer to the dam, to the room which didn't have window, no ventilation. I was actually suffocating myself, having been there not more than an hour.
Why was she tortured for so long? What were they after?
This was a woman who took a decision that my country comes first, irregardless of how painful or how difficult or immense the torture could be.
She did it anticipating that there would be a better future. And there's been such a profound betrayal of what that struggle was about.
In September 1983, 23-year-old Nokuthula Simelane, an Umkhonto we Sizwe operative, was abducted by members of the Soweto Special Branch. She was held captive for 5 weeks at a farm, chained, assaulted, tortured, and then she disappeared. Her case is one of hundreds of unsolved apartheid atrocities. Since then, her younger sister, Thembine Kadimeng, has been on a crusade to seek justice for Nokuthula and closure for her grieving family. Now, 33 years later, her alleged murderers have finally been charged.
The family of slain MK activist Nokuthula Simelane is hoping for closure and justice.
The NPA is forging ahead with the prosecution of 4 apartheid-era police believed to be behind her killing.
But where does the truth lie? Will it finally be exposed? Or like Nokuthula's body, will it remain buried beneath a history of brutality and betrayal? Nokuthula Simelane was born into a family of activists who were loyal members of the ANC during apartheid.
She was a dedicated person. She was very intelligent. I mean, her degree was cum laude, and she never received it. She was very beautiful. She was a person who committed herself. How my father summed her up for me was that everything she touched turned into gold. My mom still has her school results from high school, and they were brilliant. She was a very hardworking person, and no wonder the ANC found her as a jewel as well, to be able to use her in the struggle to emancipate South Africa.
Her cousin, Barney Molokwani, was one of the most celebrated ANC fighters ever. And the family provided safe haven to the special unit that Barney was part of. So even when their daughter went missing, for the next couple of years beyond that, when Barney came on his missions, and blew up Sasol, they were the most kind of successful missions the ANC launched against apartheid South Africa. They were spectacular. Even though they didn't know what had happened to their daughter, they continued at extraordinary risk to themselves to put them, to do everything they could for the movement.
Mark Kaplan is an award-winning filmmaker who has made several documentaries on the disappearance of activists during apartheid, including Nokuthula.
Filmmakers have a responsibility. Film prevents the past from disappearing. But in everything that has happened since the TRC, it's become even more apparent just to what extent the story of Nokuthula is a betrayal.
Nokuthula was a committed freedom fighter, a courier transporting messages for the underground movement between Swaziland and South Africa, and she was under surveillance by the security branch.
Her cover had been blown. She had been visiting home, and the security police had come looking for her. She should not have come back to the country.
Everybody who was outside the country was under surveillance. Whether you are Jacob Zuma, whether you are Nokuthula Simelane, whether you are Barney Molokwani, whether you are Spiwe Nyanda, you were under surveillance. The fact of the matter is, everybody who had left the country because of the police pressure, and they were under surveillance, and they still committed themselves that surveillance or no surveillance will still continue with the course.
Despite the risk, she was sent on one more mission before her university graduation. She came to Johannesburg to help set up ANC structures in the Vaal Triangle under the pretext of buying shoes for her graduation. She was met at the Carlton Centre by an undercover policeman. Members of the Soweto security branch were waiting.
Norman Mkonza was a police officer. He joined the police service, I think, in 1981, if I'm very right. He was never a member of the ANC.
What we know from the Truth and Reconciliation hearings from one of her abductors, Constable Nimrod Vei, who also confessed to her family, was that after being interrogated at Norwood Police Station, she was transported in the boot of a car to a farm in Vlakplaas belonging to the family of one of her abductors, Willem Coetzee. What followed was weeks of unimaginable torture, chained to a bed, guarded by 6 policemen, electrocuted in a dam, punched, kicked, forced to soil herself, possibly even sexually assaulted. According to Coetzee, after only a week she was turned into a police informant and dropped off at the Swazi border.
Was she willing to give you any answers to the information that you wanted?
Yes, Chairperson.
But this was denied by Vei.
No, I don't remember her naming any contact here in South Africa. She would deny everything and then she would be assaulted.
Some in Swaziland said the ANC people sent her to the Republic, and we went to the ANC people and they denied any knowledge of Nokuthula. In 1985, we decided to approach the press. Her picture appeared in the newspaper, and one police contacted us after seeing her picture on the newspaper and said he knew that girl because he kept guard at that girl in Vlakplaas police station. And the last time that police saw Nokuthula was ill, and she was severely and brutally tortured.
She was in a crouching position in the boot of the car with some leg irons. The hands were fastened with handcuffs at the back. The next day, when I asked Sergeant Pretorius about the whereabouts of the lady, she said to me, "Muni baya fra frani."
Technology isn't all scary. There's also fun stuff like gaming.
Lots of women do play games, whether it's on their phones or their tablets.
Then there are Africans who are using new tools to make other people's lives much easier.
We typed the whole CV on a small, QWERTY Nokia phone.
For all these and other technology and social media news, join me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News.
Siphiwo Mtimkulu, Eastern Cape student activist. In 1982, he launched a civil suit against the police for torture and poisoning. He disappeared with his comrade, Topsy Madaka. They were trapped by police, drugged, shot, burnt. Their killers only confessed 14 years later. The Pepco 3, abducted by police in 1985, assaulted, drugged, strangled, their bodies also burnt. The truth only emerged 11 years later. The Cradock 4, also Eastern Cape activists, abducted in 1985, mutilated, their car set alight. In these cases and hundreds more, the death squads responsible were denied amnesty. There could be no reconciliation or forgiveness without truth.
I have not forgiven them. Why must I forgive them when they don't want to tell the truth? And the beauty part of this, they are not asking forgiveness from us, the people who have lost their beloved ones. They are asking forgiveness from the government.
I feel a greatest form of betrayal to the perpetrators for us to allow them into our pain, allow them into our space, allow them into our loss. And we say as a family, we are prepared to say it's okay, painful as it is. Why do they kick our hand? Why do they kick our arms? Our open arms, which are saying, let's be brothers and sisters. Let's build a united South Africa, irregardless of human rights violation.
The TRC was established in 1995 to allow a battered society to come to terms with its brutal past. Politically motivated crimes committed either in defense of apartheid or in pursuit of liberation would be forgiven on condition of full disclosure.
I think the Truth Commission laid a basis for the work that still has to be done. When I think about Nokuthula's case, I'm so conscious of the fact that at the time already there was a file, an investigative file on what had happened in her case, and yet the Truth Commission didn't have access to it and actually couldn't in fact put the evidence to those who had come forward to apply for amnesty, because if they had, it's quite likely that you could have had a very different outcome.
What makes it worse in her case was that when they broke ranks, there was a formal police investigation. So the Coetzee and Pretorius were suspended. And so the TRC should have known, and the report, the police report should have been part of what they took into account. It was not taken into account at the TRC. What happened to the TRC was that Coetzee and Pretorius provided the same reasoning as they had done earlier to the police investigators. When that police investigation happened, two people from the unit called the investigator back and said, "We've been coached, we were lying to you."
And in fact, what you have is a break between the black policeman and the white policeman. Black ones say, there is no way that she could have escaped. We know that she was so badly tortured. We were the last ones who saw her, and the kind of condition she was in just doesn't, the idea that she could escape just didn't make any sense. Nevertheless, even though I think the judges were very doubtful about granting them amnesty for the full thing, what they did get was an amnesty really for the kidnapping or the abduction. But the Amnesty Committee made the point that they disbelieved the rest of their version, and in fact that there should be further action on the matter.
But nothing came of that, or of the hundreds of cases gathering dust in the NPA's offices. In 2007, there was one successful prosecution of the former Minister of Law and Order, Adrian Vlok, and former Police Chief, Johan van der Merwe, for the poisoning of Reverend Frank Chikane in 1989. Both men received a suspended sentence.
And if you think of the almost sick joke of the so-called trial of former Minister Vlok and General van der Merwe, a morning in court, sort of greeting their fans and their followers, acknowledging their guilt of one particular act, receiving a suspended sentence, no cross-examination, no victims present, and off they go.
Why has government closed ranks? Why have they been amenable to Vlok and others going to them and saying, we want amnesty, and if you don't give us amnesty, we're going to expose whatever dark secrets you have?
In 2003, the Mbeki government amended the TRC Act to facilitate amnesty against prosecution if perpetrators provided sworn affidavits, plea bargains, and mitigating factors. Amnesty could also be granted behind closed doors without requiring the input of victims and their families. Together with the families of the PEMCO 3 and Cradock 4, Thembi took the government to court in 2007 to overturn the amendments. She won, and victims can now demand prosecution of perpetrators who did not apply for amnesty. But still, there were no prosecutions, no reparations for victims and their families.
I think the state have let us down as victims for reneging on an agreement that we took as families to say we're letting go of any civil claim that we are entitled to, we're letting go of any benefit. I mean, other families lost breadwinners in the struggle. So for us not to be given the truth, not to be allowed closure, but also not to be allowed the full implementation of the Act, I think was a betrayal.
Special Assignment emailed the NPA for comment. We never received a response to our request for an interview.
They never received the necessary attention due to issues relating to resources, human resources. You must understand that the responsibility to investigate is that of the police. You cannot make a prosecutorial decision if the matter is not fully investigated. Now, those matters there was no dedicated team in terms of ensuring that they focus solely on the TRC cases as well as to enable the prosecution to make decisions.
But at the time, there was a priority crimes unit that could have assisted.
It seems that there is a bigger picture here, and we have affidavits from former National Director of Prosecutions Vusi Pikoli, as well as the Priority Crimes Litigation Unit's former head Anton Ackerman, and they speak to political interference with these cases. And so none of these cases were taken forward by these respective people because there was political interference and they weren't permitted or allowed to continue with these cases. And so that's the bigger context and the bigger picture, and I think that lends itself as to why these prosecutions have taken so long to take place.
In his affidavit, Pikoli accuses cabinet ministers, deputy ministers, directors general and convicted former police commissioner, the late Jackie Selebi, of meddling, flouting the rule of law and the constitution. He cites this as the reason the murder of Nokuthula Simelane was never properly investigated.
The ANC were divided in response to the TRC. They were divided because, they were kind of hiding acts, atrocities that have been perpetrated in the course of liberating South Africa.
So we cannot really dispute their assertions or really comment on those.
I've seen the pain in my mother's eyes of my father dying without knowing where her child is. It has taken its toll on our family, it has taken its toll on myself, on everybody else. My brother who was coming after Nokuthula died last year in August. And we had just filed at the High Court. And his pain was that he's leaving a process unfinished, And you can imagine the burden that my mom has. Every time she talks about this, she says, may I not die without having laid her to rest.
The deepening hunger crisis in Malawi is threatening the survival of children.
And also it is the life-threatening part of malnutrition.
Malawi is facing its worst food crisis in 9 years.
Mugabe is the world's oldest sitting head of state, ahead of Queen Elizabeth of Britain.
The veteran leader seeks to temporarily forget his party's problems and instead focus on his legacy.
But he shows no sign of slowing down or stepping down from power after 36 years in office.
"33 years after the abduction, torture and disappearance of her older sister Nokuthula, Thembi Nkadimeng is now the mayor of Polokwane. But this has not stopped her crusade for the truth. In 2015, she brought a civil suit against the NPA.
They were left with no space. It was either that they go to a court of law to go and respond on something that can never be responded to, because the laws were set far prior before the commencement of the amnesty.
So the Southern Africa Litigation Centre decided to take on this case because in terms of our international criminal justice program, we seek to ensure that the authorities respect their domestic and international law obligations. And in this case, we're talking about the duty to prosecute. And more importantly, the importance of giving answers and closure to the Simelane family who don't know what happened to Nokuthula Simelane, how she was murdered.
But then we had to consider what were our options. Did we go to court to actually force them to prosecute? Did we go to court to apply for what we call a nollie prosequi and then private plea prosecute them?
So years of negotiation and correspondence with the NPA yielded no results, and after trying our best to negotiate and discuss the matters with the NPA, they refused to institute a decision either to prosecute or to institute a judicial inquest into the disappearance of Nokuthula Simelane, leaving the Simelane family with no answers. And so, after we filed our papers in May 2015, our objective was to compel the National Prosecuting Authority to make a decision. And that subsequently seems to have catapulted them into action, and they've now decided to prosecute the suspected perpetrators.
We have first to accept that it is really a serious indictment on the criminal justice system, that it took a civil application by the Simelane family to ensure that the matter is expedited. We commend the family for their selfless act of not only ensuring justice for their daughter and sister, but for all those who were subjected to gross human rights violations.
But I still commend the NPA, in particular Sean Abrahams, for taking the decision, because the very same laws have been applicable with the 3 or 2 previous NDDP chairpersons that I've spoken to and were unable to take such decisions.
An investigation team that was solely dedicated to the matter, and prosecution team was actually identified to look at the matter. They took 2 months to ensure that the national director is in a position to make a prosecutorial decision. He considered the National Prosecuting Authority policy directives in terms of making that decision. And therefore, the decision to prosecute is solely based on what is contained in the docket. That is, the evidence that is there is credible, is admissible.
In addition to the Southern African Litigation Centre, Tembi has also been assisted by the Kulumani organisation, law firm Weber Wenzel, the Legal Resources Centre, and her sister's former comrades.
Even now, the support I'm receiving from the ANC, the MK in particular, with regard to the case, I go to them, they write statements, they are coming in full action, even in support of this court action.
She also hired former policeman Frank Dutton.
When Frank reproduced the docket, because remember, the docket was missing. And so basically he had to reconstruct the docket. And this was after Tembi had gone to every one of the people on the list to try and get them to tell the truth. And having failed that, that's when we brought Frank on board.
The reason why I'm going to court is not about Nokuthula. It's about all of them. Because I believe I'm going to create a precedent that all those families that are going to come after the Nokuthula case will say, as you have done in Nokuthula's case, do the same in Stanza Bopape's case, do the same in the Pep Kotri case, do the same in the Credok 4 case.
3 decades following the abduction and murder of anti-apartheid activist Nokuthula Simelane, 4 former apartheid police officers are now in the dock. This after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission refused Willem Kotze, Anton Pretorius and Frederick Mong amnesty.
The 4th accused, Msebenzi Khadebe, now a suspended DA councillor, was charged with murder and kidnapping. Unlike his 3 co-accused, he had not applied for amnesty for her abduction.
My clients did not seek amnesty for her death, as they have throughout denied killing her. Speculation is rife, even that MK may have killed her themselves.
If you do an analysis of his story, the timing of things does not add up. And I'm quite convinced that that will emerge in this court case.
In fact, Nokuthula's unit remained intact for the next 10 years. By refusing to betray her comrades, she probably paid the ultimate price. The accused will reappear in court on the 29th of March. But will it be too little, too late?
I feel so sad. I no longer have faith that the truth will come out. I also no longer have faith in the justice system.
What is the benefit am I going to receive by these perpetrators sitting in prison? No, in fact, it's a waste of our tax money. The benefit is more in me healing so that I participate in the building of South Africa, which is what Nokuthula fought for, by the way.
But what would Nokuthula think of her country today, fractured again by racism, with even the statue erected in her honor in Bethel during 2009 now vandalized?
This racism element that keeps on coming up, we are unable to close the divide. It's because the wounds are still bleeding, they are still gaping. We are unable to close it.
Thembi named one of her 4 children Nokuthula. In 2008, I visited them. At the time, she feared that the burden of finding the truth might have to be continued by her children.
Even today, Nokuthula is still serving the country in absentia. Hence, we are going to court and she's leading another war, another battle, because she has just refused to die.
Today, her daughter Nokuthula is about the same age that Thembi was when she began her crusade. So will Thembi's quest continue the TRC's unfinished business? Will she discover where the truth lies?
My plea to them again is, if you have thrown her into the river, tell me which one. If you have burned her to ashes, take me to the site. If you have buried her underground, just give me the remains, and the truth shall set you free.